One Piece. If you watch anime, I would be shocked if you didn't know about this series. You might even know about it if you don't watch anime. It's been a big deal since the early 2000s, where it was considered one of the big three of anime, alongside Bleach and Naruto. But while the other two have completed their stories years ago, One Piece is a behemoth that continues to grow. Ichiro Oda started publishing the One Piece manga in 1997, and the anime began airing in 1999. I first began watching it via online fan subs around 2013, and I was hooked immediately. I've been a fan ever since. Then in 2023, season 1 of the Netflix live-action adaptation was released. The fanbase wasn't sure what to expect, but the results were well received. Now, 2.5 years later, season 2 is coming out, and fans are more confident in the outcome. But did season 1 truly earn such optimism? I'm fashionably late, as usual, but I wanted to take a look back and really dig into the strengths and weaknesses of the first season, to determine whether season 2 is building on a strong foundation or not. Now, truth be told, when season 1 first came out, I was not interested in giving it a chance. Too many Disney live-action remakes had left me jaded. However, my husband was curious. He'd seen me watching the anime, but despite being intrigued, the idea of trying to catch up was too daunting. The live-action was more approachable in that regard. He started to watch it, and he'd tell me about it, and I'd tell him how much better the anime was. Both of us wanted the other to watch what we were watching, so finally we struck a deal. Together, we would watch the anime and live-action arcs back to back. Later I'll tell you the results of that, but suffice to say, it led to me making this video series to share my thoughts. Of course, anyone who knows the anime knows that eventually the filler becomes ridiculous. And yet I didn't end up pursuing the manga because the color, movement, music, and especially the voices were a significant part of what made the story so impactful for me. As a result, I am admittedly rather ignorant of the original work, so I've invited Zexund, a fellow One Piece fan from our Discord server, to help me create this video series. Zexund, care to introduce yourself?
Hello there. Thanks for having me, Emmy. As a longtime fan, first-time contributor, I'm honored to be here. I discovered One Piece when anime was much harder to come across in the West. It was actually the abysmal 4Kids localization on Fox that was my introduction to the series.
He's made a rubber! How did that happen? Yo ho ho, he took a bite of gum gum!
Then, when I went into college, I discovered fan subs, and that's when I truly fell in love with the series. But after crew got split up at the end of the Sabaody Archipelago arc, I couldn't wait for the anime's now reduced pace, and I switched to reading the manga. I've been an avid reader of the manga since then, occasionally watching parts of the Toei anime. And then, of course, I watched the live-action Netflix adaptation.
Now, it has to be said, as far as live-action anime adaptations go, One Piece has been hailed as one of the best so far, and by that metric, I have no argument.
Allow me to throw in my heavyweight geek experience to cover 3 key points about that. The first is to confirm that, yes, it is one of the best live-action anime adaptations. The bottom of the barrel is definitely Dragon Ball Evolution. Then you have things like Netflix's Death Note, the glorified highlight reel that was Yu Yu Hakusho's live-action adaptation, or some of the soulless, drama, romance, slice-of-life adaptations you sometimes see. The live-action One Piece is better than all of those, as there was clearly a lot of love put into the series. The only example of a better live-action anime adaptation that I'm aware of is probably 2019's theatrical release of Alita: Battle Angel. But if you know of a better one, sound off in the comments. Let's get Emmy some of that sweet, sweet engagement. Second, I want to acknowledge that any anime adaptation in the West is going to be facing an uphill battle. The nature of a project, the platform it's on, and the intended audiences all have big effects on things like the people who are drawn to help create it or who want to work on it. For instance, anime adaptations aren't going to attract AAA actors or big Hollywood powerhouses. Thus, when we critique things like acting, directing, or writing, we need to be aware that the potential talent pool is unfortunately limited. Not to cast aspersions on what they did manage to do very well in the series, but it's an unfortunate reality we have to acknowledge. The third and final point I want to convey is that the multi-hour threshing we're about to give this series is not because we hate it. We're both approaching this from the point of view that, as good as it is for a live-action anime adaptation, it's far from being as good as it should have been. We're both examining this from the perspective of writers, people with a passion for storytelling, and, frankly, lovers of One Piece. Something coming up short is really still a great example we can learn from.
I should also point out that we are aware of how Oda is involved with the production of the live-action series. And apparently he's more than happy to see the creators of each adaptation of his story make the content their own. So to be clear, although I will be heavily comparing and contrasting the anime and live-action throughout this series, the goal is not to critique either of them according to how well they copy the manga, but rather how well they adapt it. We're going to talk about the writing to see what worked, what didn't, and what we can learn from each iteration, as well as discussing what it could all mean for season 2 of live action and onward. Be ye warned, there will be major spoilers, but just for the East Blue Saga of each version. Let's dive in, shall we? Season 1 of the live action parallels the first 45 episodes of the anime, or 95 chapters of the manga, with some elements from later chapters and episodes too. But while the anime had approximately 17 hours to cover that much content, the live action only gave itself about 7 hours. That's less than half as much time. And keep in mind that the beginning of the anime has almost no filler. Even the one-page fan edit, which strictly keeps only what is in the manga, is still almost 13 hours long. Now certainly, imposing limits can push creativity, and obviously compressing the story makes it more accessible for a new audience. But the changes made to compress the story so much, as you might expect, come with pros and cons. Episode 1 of the live action covers the first 3.5-ish anime episodes, or roughly 7 manga chapters. And there's not much big picture difference between the anime and live action. After opening exposition sets the stage by showing Gold Roger's last words and explaining how this sparked the pirate era, the story starts with Luffy meeting Koby and helping him escape Alvida. Then they go to Shellstown, Luffy meets Zoro, who is being punished by the Marines, and together they defeat Axan Morgan and his son Helmeppo. After which Koby stays behind to pursue his own goal of becoming a Marine, while Zoro starts traveling with Luffy. Over the course of these events, we learn about the Grand Line, Devil Fruit abilities, as well as Luffy's goal to become the King of the Pirates, and Zoro's goal to become the world's greatest swordsman. We're also shown some of Luffy's backstory, namely the influence of Shanks, a good-natured pirate who inspired Luffy to become a pirate himself and gave him his iconic straw hat. Some of the differences worth noting: in the anime, Nami is actually the first main character we see, though she spends this arc on the sidelines, never directly interacting with the others, but making us, the audience, curious about her, since the narrative gives her enough focus to show she's important without really letting us get to know her. The live action introduces us to Luffy first instead, and Nami doesn't show up until almost halfway through the episode.
But her introductory scene where she tricks Buggy's thugs does match her manga introduction, although it initially came after the Shellstown arc.
The live action also gives her more of a central role in this arc, since Luffy happens to run into her while infiltrating the Marine base, and they work together to steal a map to the Grand Line. Whereas in the anime, she performs that heist on her own, while Luffy's goal is retrieving Zoro's swords from Helmeppo. Regarding Zoro, in the anime we don't meet him until Luffy does, at which point he's already been strung up by the Marines. And Rika, a little girl who happens to be sneaking in to visit Zoro at the same time Luffy's around, later tells Luffy about the incident with Helmeppo, which led to Zoro's detainment. The live action instead introduces us to Zoro earlier, at the same time cleverly including an Easter egg for longtime fans and sowing information for later seasons. After which, Zoro coincidentally comes into Shellstown at the same time as Luffy, who then gets to witness firsthand the incident with Helmeppo, which leads to Zoro being detained. While in the anime, Koby and Helmeppo are part of the finale between Luffy, Zoro, and Axan Morgan. In live action, both boys are sidelined during that part of the plot. But speaking of the finale with Morgan, in the anime, the reason Luffy and Zoro fight him is because he was abusing his power. It was under his authority that Helmeppo terrorized the town people, strung up Zoro for defending them, and planned to unjustly execute him. Morgan himself makes unconscionable demands of his men, including ordering the execution of an innocent child just for disrespecting him. As a result, Morgan's defeat is appreciated by both the local Marines and townspeople alike. So even though Luffy and and Zoro are required to leave, their departure is on good terms. In live action, they fight because Luffy and Nami are stealing Morgan's safe and Zoro decides to help them. Naturally, they must flee immediately afterward. But despite being beaten, Morgan retains his position, so it seems the locals don't really mind him being in power. Lastly, Luffy's interactions with Shanks in the anime are contained to one episode at the end of the Romance Dawn arc, whereas the live action weaves these flashbacks throughout its first and second episodes.
This is compared to the manga, where the Luffy-Shanks history is the literal beginning of the story, not just figuratively so. This is a great example of how story's medium and the kind of audience one has are important aspects for aspiring writers to consider. For a magazine like Shonen Jump, a slower start can work since you're pretty much guaranteed eyeballs from fans of other series, though you still need to hook readers quickly or be ruthlessly cut. Whereas an anime or live-action series needs to hook the audience right away so they don't immediately move on. But to give credit where it's due, the live-action creators definitely knew how to hook the audience with the teases of Buggy, and Garp, as well as the later on this season teaser montage at the end of this episode. So, I'll tip my hat to that. And believe it or not, it's not a fedora.
Absolutely, the live action has its strengths. Unfortunately, the first and most consistent weakness I noticed is how much bad exposition it has. Of course, the anime definitely has its fair share, but the live action is an opportunity to improve such shortcomings. However, the writers immediately marinate the script in forced exposition instead of allowing the story to show those aspects as it unfolds. As a prime example, let's look at the opening of each version.
Gold Roger's initial scene is covered by only one page in the manga. Then the narrative opens with Luffy's backstory with Shanks to show why Luffy is driven to be a great pirate instead of the usual motivation of greed and vainglory.
In the anime, the opening scene is about 30 seconds long and likewise only reveals that Gold Roger sparked the beginning of the Great Pirate Era by telling the crowd at his execution that he had left his treasure for them to find, which sent people flocking to the Grand Line in pursuit of it. This is all the information we need to understand why Luffy wants to set sail for the Grand Line and become the King of Pirates. It just sets the historical stage and lets the main story take over from there. In contrast, the opening of the live action is almost 4 minutes long and starts by telling us that this world is unique, mysterious, and dangerous. It describes how the world is filled with hundreds of islands strewn across vast seas, and it tells us that pirates are in search of a life of freedom and adventure. Opening a story with exposition like this is a rookie mistake, and that's just what's in the first 30 seconds.
Yes, the expositional delivery is amateurish, but it's worse than that. Most pirates are not motivated by a desire for freedom and adventure. In the beginning, it's just about treasure and being able to indulge their worst impulses. Later on, the anime and manga also show how the world government and the corrupt powers that be often drive otherwise good people to become pirates. Those that become pirates in search of freedom, adventure, and romance are very specifically portrayed as oddballs in the story. And to be clear, it's not just that most pirates in the anime and manga are driven by greed, power, and violence. Most of the pirates in the live-action series are the exact same.
Another example of poor exposition is how characters will simply tell us what we're supposed to know, even when we will be or already have been shown it.
Most feared pirate hunter in the East Blue.
Good fighter.
You're a good guy. You're a great fighter.
You're really good at thieving. And a good talker, too.
Ever since I was a kid, Shanks would tell me stories about pirates and their adventures. So yeah, the sea's been calling. Well, not exactly calling because I pretty much can't swim. But you get the idea. I'm setting out to follow my dream. To find the One Piece. And become King of the Pirates!
Yes, a moment later it's revealed he's talking to a bird, but let's be honest, this is blatant exposition monologued directly at the audience, and this is how the main story opens. This is Luffy, the main character's introduction. Characters will also just spell out the themes and morals.
Free yourselves!
It's all about being free.
You should never let anyone tell you what you can't do.
Not everything can be solved with violence. A man needs to be strong, but he also needs to be good.
If there are good pirates and bad pirates, then there are going to be good Marines and bad Marines too.
I've read between the lines and heard you overtly.
While some of these examples would be just fine or even encouraged on their own, it's the sheer overarching repetitiveness of it all that has us criticizing similar dialogue throughout this analysis.
And you may notice as we go along that Luffy has the most examples of overt dialogue. To be fair, original Luffy is incredibly straightforward and honest, to a wonderful fault. But the key is that it sets him apart from most other characters. If live-action Luffy was also effectively the only character who spoke so blatantly, I would consider it an intentional character trait. But the live-action dialogue overall is often lacking subtlety and has a lot of redundancies. Luffy is simply the most frequent offender, which can be explained by him having the most screen time and dialogue. Again, to be fair, the anime is not perfect with its dialogue either, but it does far more to show us the themes and characters in action, allowing their goals, traits, and abilities to speak for themselves, respecting the audience enough to pick up on it rather than having a character just spell it out up front.
Even when the anime does have characters simply say things, it's often meant to be an outward representation of an internal realization.
わざと僕にけしかけて殴らせたんだ。あいつ、あのライオンと戦ってきたんだ。あの犬のために。
やっとあいつを助ける方法がわかった。こんな部屋があるからいけねえんだ。痛くもねえあいつの居場所なんて俺が全部ぶっ壊してやる。
Which is to say, it's a payoff rather than a shortcut. Though it's also used at times to explain things that can't reasonably be shown, like expositing what devil fruits are, how certain techniques work, etc. Or it's when it would be believable for the character to speak so plainly, like Axehand Morgan preaching his philosophy on authority.
There are also pros and cons in how the live-action changes affect the story's pacing. The way the writers rearranged and wove together character and plot elements was certainly creative, and they did overlap some things to improve efficiency, but they mostly cut down the runtime by simply cutting content. And then they crammed certain plot beats and stretched others, which is something we can see across the season as a whole, but the first episode in and of itself exemplifies that mistake quite well. In the first 20 minutes of the live action, we're introduced to Garp and Gold Roger as they stand around and talk before Roger's execution. Then we're introduced to Luffy as he bails out his boat while talking to us. Then we're introduced to Alvida when she attacks a ship looking for Zoro. Then we're introduced to Kobe as he stands around talking to Luffy in the ship's hold. Then we're introduced to Shanks as he helps his crew unload their ship and talks to Luffy. Then we're introduced to Zoro, who stands around talking to Mr. Seven before fighting him. We're introduced to 8 characters, some of whom are hardly necessary for us to know right off the bat, and half of whom aren't doing much of anything besides talking, meaning there's neither enough time nor activity in any of these introductory scenes to allow us to get to know the characters who are important at this point in the story.
While parts of the episode are more accurate to how characters are introduced in the manga, it lacks any of the efficiency in introducing Luffy. As Emmy explained, the live-action story is bloated in a lot of ways, whereas the original portrayed the same scenes more quickly and efficiently to hook the audience. When adapting a popular story, the audience is already granted, so we as writers have some slack in how much to include and the ability to use a slower pace. However, that doesn't excuse any and all bloat. We want to respect the viewer's attention, whether that's a potential new fan whose first exposure is the adaptation, or a pre-existing fan who may already know every detail. It's a matter of judgment that's born from experience, and our goal is to show that contrast.
In the next 20 minutes of the live action, we finally get to see several of the scenes which were key characterization moments in the anime, like Shanks brushing off the bandits' ill treatment of him, Nami tricking some pirates so as to steal their boat, and Zoro standing up to Helmeppo for the sake of little Rika. But much of the in-between time is, again, squandered by having our characters effectively just stand or sit around and simply talk. Which isn't inherently bad, but the problem here is that a lot of the time the dialogue is not very clever or layered, the acting does not add much subtext, the environment and what occupies the characters does little to enrich the world building, etc. And B, this first episode only has 3/4 as much time to get through the story of this first arc, and it is not effectively utilizing that time during these scenes, which becomes a problem in the last last 20 minutes. A large portion of it is spent on Nami and Luffy trying to find Morgan's office and secure the map. Then they're brought together with Zoro for a quick action scene which doesn't add much in terms of theme or characterization, making it much less satisfying than its anime version, which had those aspects.
As an adaptation of a shonen action series, the action scene with Morgan was a necessity. My issue is just how nerfed Luffy and Zoro are to drag out the scene, which is another recurring problem. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji are supposed to be overwhelming powerhouses in the East Blue, often only struggling due to circumstances. Morgan should have been handled much more easily to establish the exceptional ability of the crew. Additionally, with how relatively normal they make Morgan, and how much more tame Helmeppo is, that removes a lot of the layers behind the fight's catharsis, but that's something we'll dive into in a later video.
When the fight is over, Koby, after having been sidelined since the midpoint, returns for a very brief farewell. And then the last 5 minutes are spent setting up the antagonists for the next episode. So really the live action only gave itself 15 minutes to cover 35 minutes of anime runtime, after spending its first 40 minutes to cover an equivalent time from the anime, meaning that the first 2/3 of the episode have done little to improve the story's efficiency, and the last third is terribly rushed, which severely hampers the emotional weight it should be carrying as it ties up Koby's arc in this episode and the fledgling Straw Hats successfully escape together. And as I said, we see this across the season as a whole. The live action keeps allotting comparatively less time to fit in more content, requiring more changes and more cuts and overall more hurried pacing as it progresses. Episode 2 of the live action covers about 4.5-ish episodes of the anime, or roughly 14 manga chapters. Here, the general premise of the plot remains the same. The crew still ends up in Orangetown and faces the buggy pirates, but the execution is very different. I would say the major differences are, in the anime during the Shellstown arc, we see that the Grand Line map which Nami was trying to steal from Axehand Morgan had been preemptively taken by the buggy pirates. Whereas in live action, Buggy's crew was still in the process of planning their heist when Luffy and Nami came and stole the map from Morgan. Because of this change, the transition to Orangetown flows more naturally since the buggy pirates kidnapped the Straw Hats to take the map from them. Whereas in the anime, the segue is quite contrived. Luffy ends up being carried there by a random giant bird with Zoro hot on his heels. And of course they meet Nami there since she is pursuing the Grand Line map. Due to Luffy's coincidental arrival, he doesn't have much direction in the anime arc. He's just responding to whatever's in front of him. He fights off some of Buggy's crew when they attack him thinking he's Nami's boss. Then Nami helps him find something to eat. Then they team up and she pretends to betray him to get close to Buggy. Then Luffy hangs out in a cage for a while until the lion Richie breaks it open trying to attack him. Shortly after, Luffy beats up Richie on behalf of Shushu. Then when the mayor decides to confront Buggy, Luffy interferes to save the old man and takes on the clown himself. Meanwhile, Zoro is either just supporting Luffy or sleeping to recover from an injury Buggy gave him. Nami is the only one with a clear goal, to get away with the map and as much treasure as she can carry. Whereas in live action, the whole crew has just the one main objective: get away with the map. While the anime has the characters in several locations around Orangetown, the live action has everything happen in one location, Buggy's circus tent, which is a sensible choice to reduce the time and scope of production. On that note, the wacky members of Buggy's crew in the live action are either cut or off-screen most of the time, save for Kabaji, who stands around talking character development at Zoro before being abruptly defeated. By contrast, the anime features a lot of interaction with Buggy's crew, including several more fights. Nami actually pretends to join Buggy's crew for a bit before betraying and fighting them to defend Luffy. Zoro is the first to fight Buggy, and he gets injured when Buggy reveals his devil fruit power by stabbing Zoro in the back. Then Luffy fights the lion and his tamer Moji. Later, despite his injury, Zoro has an entire duel with Kabaji. And the final showdown is Buggy versus Luffy with some help from Nami. The citizens of Orangetown, mainly the mayor, also play a larger role in the anime, whereas in the live action, they're little more than set dressing, there to characterize Buggy. The B-plot following Koby is another major difference. In the anime, his character arc was not revisited until after the Straw Hats had entered the Grand Line. However, the live action keeps his character as a secondary secondary focus over the course of the season, which is utilized to help the altered plot flow and fit together, but it also means the creators are squeezing in extra content and thus straining their time limitations even further. In this episode, we also find more examples of poor exposition and dialogue that is redundant or on the nose. I couldn't resist. On with the clips.
I'm feeling so piratey.
I like being different.
5 minutes later.
I'm a different kind of pirate.
Later that same evening.
I'm a different kind of pirate.
What did you do? What did you do to their town? You destroyed everything!
A few moments later.
When I ran out of the tent, I saw a town, or what was left of one after Bucky destroyed it.
Later that same evening.
You've destroyed our town.
Being a Marine is all I've ever wanted.
1 minute, 37 seconds later.
Being a Marine is my dream.
You were right, Shanks. Back when you wouldn't let me join your crew. I'm not ready, but when I am, I'm gonna be a pirate captain. With my own ship, and a crew that will always have each other's backs.
And again, a lot of the episode just has the characters hanging around, simply talking. When looking at the bigger picture of both the anime and live action, what I find interesting is the difference in the narrative focus of this arc. In the anime, that focus is mainly on Luffy and Nami. It gives them a bunch of one-on-one time where they get to know each other, which is important because A, the audience finally gets to learn about this character who's been sneaking around on the sidelines for the first several episodes, and B, it results in Nami joining the crew. But in live action, Nami spends one-on-one time with Zoro instead, and the narrative focus is on Luffy and Buggy, with their conflict mainly serving as a prompt for weaving in the rest of Luffy's backstory with Shanks by creating a drawn-out and misleading mystery regarding how things ended between the boy and his idol.
Overall, the lack of time spent between Nami and Luffy may seem like kind of a wash overall, since Luffy gained that extra time with Nami back in Shellstown. However, it's still a poor choice given the lack of development Nami gets in the first half of the season, and more, which Emmy will explain in a moment. And otherwise, the Zoro-Nami dynamic was a poor choice to focus on, given that they're both quote-unquote straight men in the live-action adaptation, so their interactions lack a foil and thus feel flat. Meanwhile, Luffy and Buggy are more entertaining to watch, but having so much time together undermines the running gag that Buggy is obsessed with revenge on Luffy, while Luffy basically forgets he exists.
The change in narrative focus winds up having a big impact, because the purpose of this arc is not simply to formally introduce Nami, but to challenge her, particularly her preconceptions of pirates, so as to make her comfortable with being one. Buggy juxtaposed against Luffy is the catalyst for this shift. Buggy is effectively a tame version of Arlong. He's destructive and full of himself, but he's not as malicious or organized. And while Buggy seats himself above the empty town and revels in its destruction, Luffy puts his own well-being on the line to help a mere dog avenge his sentimental treasure. Certainly, Shushu's subplot is removable. The dog cannot speak for himself, so then another character is needed to exposit his story for him, which isn't ideal. And because Moji and Richie are included only to be his antagonists, then once he goes, it makes sense to cut them too. But his purpose in the story, showing Nami that Luffy is different, is key, and the live action didn't find an effective way to transfer that to their version. In fact, it somewhat sabotaged that key aspect of the story. Live action Nami knows Luffy is aware that Buggy has leveled the town and kept the citizens as a literal captive audience, forcing them to partake in his twisted circus. Yet Luffy does nothing to help. He barely reacts to the information at all. After she's taken away, he does eventually stop goofing around and make an effort to defend a single child, but she's not there to see that. And when she does return for the finale against Buggy, Luffy is not fighting to aid the innocent people, he's fighting to defend his crew. And keep in mind, even Arlong cares about his crew, so that shouldn't make Luffy stand out. Yes, at the end, Luffy does not continue the people's subjugation, but him not doing something bad is not the same as him doing something good. So to a character as jaded as live-action Nami, it should mean very little.
One may even say that the drums of liberation were not beating here. If you know, you know.
Not to mention, live-action Nami doesn't even accept Luffy as a pirate because he doesn't fit her perception of what they are like.
You're not a pirate.
Yes, I am. I'm a different kind of pirate.
Pirates are pirates. There's only one kind.
So that moment near the end of him showing he's different should really just feed into her assertion that the label does not belong on him. But instead, the narrative has her react like she finally understands. In contrast, in the anime, when Luffy asserts that he's a pirate, Nami simply accepts it. So when he shows he is different from what she expects, it makes sense it challenges her perceptions of what a pirate can be. Now, honestly, due to the aimless nature of the original plot, I'd say this is the weakest arc in the anime East Blue Saga. But despite that, it plays such an important role. I think most people consider the Arlong Park episodes to be Nami's arc, but really it begins in Orangetown. Arlong Park is the climax. Without this adventure to endear her to Luffy, to make her comfortable with joining his crew, we never get to Arlong Park. And I think the live-action writers failed to recognize that significance. I think they got the impression that Orangetown was primarily about Luffy versus Buggy, because not counting the flashbacks, that's where the live-action spends most of its focus. It does end up utilizing the event, and later Buggy's character, as a device to move the main plot forward, again leaning into making the storyline more connected. But unfortunately, it missed out on a lot of depth and logical progression for Nami's character journey. Episodes 3 and 4 of the live action cover 10 episodes in the anime, or 19 manga chapters. In both the anime and live action, the Straw Hat crew visits Usopp's island simply because it happens to be the most nearby when they decide to get a better ship. While there, they meet Usopp, through him learn of Kaya, and help stop Kuro's dastardly plans. After which they are rewarded with the Going Merry. Of course, the execution of those aspects contains several notable differences between versions, each with their own pros and cons. When they meet in the anime, Usopp and his young crew are trying to scare off the Straw Hats as they come ashore, thinking them to be dangerous pirates. Whereas in live action, the young crew has understandably been cut from the cast, and Luffy simply bumps into Usopp at work in the shipyard, cleaning the Going Merry. A change which we'll discuss further in our video focusing on Usopp.
I want to add that while yes, cutting the young kids in Usopp's crew makes a lot of sense, losing them also means losing the human connection between Usopp and the villagers. It's a connection which not only helps establish the baseline of Usopp's character by showing how he affects those around him, but it also helps to endear him to us, the audience.
But on the subject of crew members being cut, Kuro's entire crew, save 2, has been removed from the live-action story, for better and for worse. Certainly having Bucci and Sham included in the house staff ruse is both sensible to Kuro's plan and fits believably in context. Speaking of those two, it's worth noting that the Meow Band brothers were turned into the Meow Band siblings, with Sham being gender bent into a female. And due to it having little, if any, impact on the story or character, while also adding to the balance of gender representation, I have no reason to fault the decision. And not having the whole crew means not having the planned attack against the whole village, which reduces the scope of the story, making it more time efficient.
However, it also means that we don't get to see the fledgling Straw Hats go all out in their first group battle. The Black Cat Pirates are the closest we get to a quote-unquote normal pirate crew in One Piece, and the fight establishes where the Straw Hats stand against the baseline pirates. The Alvida Pirates wouldn't even be a footnote if it weren't for Kobe and Alvida becoming recurring characters. This was the first chance to really see the crew more or less learn about how everyone fights and how they interact under pressure. I think it's a subtle but important difference in the original story, which initially helped set the scale for the first finale of the East Blue Saga.
The loss of the crew and Django also makes live-action Kuro's plan for obtaining Kaya's wealth and property a bit less foolproof, since it means A, he has to rely on Mary, who is loyal to Kaya, not him, and B, there's no longer a random pirate attack to blame for Kaya's demise, which C, makes the timing of her demise overtly suspicious. Unfortunately, this results in live-action Kuro not matching the daunting image of a genius man with 1,000 plans. To be fair, live-action Kuro has been poisoning Kaya to make her sick, and her being measurably physically ill for an extended period could be a reasonable excuse for her untimely end. But it's not utilized that way. It's clear Kuro is going to use his claws to end Kaya's life. How would he convince anyone that she had succumbed to illness when she would have clearly been stabbed, probably multiple times? Actually, I should note that the poisoning scheme itself is another change to the story. In the anime, Kaya was just a sickly girl suffering from natural grief and depression over the last year since her parents' death. But believably, after the monumental events of this arc, she gets on the road to recovery. Speaking of which, although it can be seen as questionable that Mary survives Kuro's attack in the anime, it does make it more believable that Kaya can recover after the narrative leaves Syrup Village, because she still has someone to help her find her feet. But in live action, Kaya seems completely ill-prepared to handle everything, since she has no experience running either the business or the estate, and because live action Mary is dead, she has no one to guide her. Yet the narrative clearly wants you to think that she's just going to take care of herself now, no problem, which is not believable. Another difference in regard to Kaya is how much interaction she gets with the crew. In the anime, she's mostly separated from them aside from a brief meeting near the beginning and end of the arc. But with the live action plot taking place predominantly within her mansion, she spends significantly more time with them, particularly getting to bond with Nami, which I'll get back to later. It's worth pointing out that limiting the scope of the setting is not just a smart production choice. Pushing the characters into closer proximity creates the opportunity to see more interactions between them, which allows for more development in a shorter time frame. It also enables the adaptation to present the original story in a fresh way, which makes it enjoyable for the audience regardless whether this is their first experience with One Piece or not.
Regarding Zoro's backstory, the live action includes it in the second half of this arc, whereas the manga shows it back in Romance Dawn as he's about to die from the firing squad, and then the anime dedicates an episode to it during the downtime at the beginning of the Baratie arc. Frankly, none of these are great. The manga's life flashing before your eyes revelation is an abrupt change in both the tone and pacing. Yes, even Oda makes mistakes. Gasp! While in the anime, it just kind of happens. In the live-action series, they had the opportunity to find a better place for its inclusion, but instead they incorporate it while Zoro is struggling to climb out of a well. Which, side note, how is that even a challenge for him? Since this placement coincides with Kuro's hunt for Kaya, a cinematic thriller in its presentation, Zoro's backstory clashes with the pacing and tone as badly as in the manga. We'll talk about the potential workarounds in our rewrites video, but here I will end by noting that the flashback is well made, especially given the involvement of child actors.
As for the Straw Hats receiving the Going Merry, the anime Syrup Village is a quiet and unassuming town which mainly seems agricultural, but the live action turns it into a well-known shipbuilding town, which creates a more sensible reason for the crew to search for a new ship there. However, again, the live action does not utilize it that way. The crew does not know about the town's industry until after they arrive. So while the live action makes it less of a convenience that they obtain a good ship there, since admittedly it is suspiciously good fortune that in the anime Mary has a ship on hand to just give the Straw Hats. But it is still equally as convenient in both anime and live action that the crew happens to go to that island for a ship in the first place. Meanwhile, the continuing B-plot has Garp favoring Koby and singling him out for mentorship, which leads to his storyline overlapping with the A-plot. Koby is sent to find Luffy and coincidentally meets Usopp as he seeks help against Kuro, which does lead to Koby successfully capturing Luffy, who was weakened after consuming an entire pot of poison soup. But when Luffy somehow instantly recovers from the poisoning, Koby just lets him go stop Kuro while he returns to Garp empty-handed. Unfortunately, this entire side plot does little to advance either Koby's personal arc, which we'll discuss in our next video, or the main plot, at best putting Garp in position to push the Straw Hats toward their next destination. And yet it eats up a decent chunk of the limited runtime.
I will also add that the reveal of Garp chasing them, as well as his identity, is a massive waste of potential. But we'll have more to say about that in the future.
Again, these episodes have their fair share of obvious exposition and redundant dialogue.
There are no pirates. Haven't been in years.
You're overthinking things, son. You just keep getting in your own way.
It's just like you said. I never thought it
tasted like poison, idiot. You're not a cook and I'm not a maid. We're pirates.
I'm the best fighter here other than you.
Being a pirate is not about raiding villages or perfect plans. It's about adventure and freedom.
That last one bugs me the most. In the anime, we're never told what being a pirate symbolizes for Luffy, and thus why Kuro's actions are so detestable to him. We are shown, but in live action, they spell it out in the dialogue, which just makes it seem like the creators have no idea who their target audience is. Despite the live action being rated TV-14, same as the anime, and adopting a more serious tone, it can be so blatant with its dialogue that it feels like it's written for children sometimes, rather than teens.
I don't mind them doing some reinforcement/setup, but the sheer redundancy and heavy-handedness of it does become grating. The live-action One Piece is far from the worst offender, but the further we showcase the issue, the harder it becomes to forgive. Remember, writers, it just takes a little time to clean up dialogue without affecting anything substantial. So it really hurts when the live-action creators didn't take that extra time with their scripts. Also, the language barrier means that this isn't something that Oda's involvement would ever fix.
In order to look at the big picture of this arc, we need to talk more about Kaya. Honestly, there's not much difference in her characterization between the original and the live action. Due to her ill health, she seems like a fragile pushover, but she's actually a headstrong and proactive character. She asserts herself. In the anime, she reprimands Kuro for his treatment of Usopp. And in the live action, she insists that Kuro allow the crew a meal and a place to sleep. She enforces her boundaries. In the anime, when Usopp, in complete panic, tries to take her away from the mansion against her will, she slaps him. In live action also, she slaps Usopp when he grabs her and firmly tells him to leave. She takes action. In the anime, after Kaya learns the truth about Kuro, she immediately arms herself and goes to confront him despite her ill health. Her attempts at negotiating with and then threatening Kuro are ultimately unsuccessful, and she's forced to retreat with Usopp's crew, but she still does everything within her power, even negotiating with Django to sacrifice herself to protect those boys. In live action, she does her best to escape with Nami and Usopp, and when they are eventually cornered, she leads Nami in an attack on Kuro, though the attempt immediately fails. So the difference between anime and live action Kaya is actually how she functions as a supporting character. To be more specific, whose character arc she primarily supports. As this is Usopp's introductory arc, her narrative role should be about helping us get to know him and see why he's a perfect addition to the Straw Hat crew. And this is true for the anime. Kaya has very little shared screen time with the Straw Hats. It's really only at the end of the arc that they meaningfully interact. So the rest of the time, it's her connection to Usopp that is of importance. We see firsthand how Usopp has been her emotional lifeline, cheering her up when she feels down, how he's willing to put his life on the line for her well-being, and how he ultimately inspires her to fight for herself. But in live action, Kaya has more meaningful connection with Nami. After arriving at the mansion, Usopp and Kaya get a 2-minute scene that shows their friendship. Meanwhile, Nami is shown making negative assumptions about Kaya due to her wealth and planning to rob her. When Kaya is presented for dinner, aside from a quick reaction shot from Usopp, he's off-screen, while time is taken for Kaya to show kindness and generosity toward Nami to contradict her earlier assumptions. During dinner, it's Nami who supports and encourages Kaya against Kuro, while Usopp just tries to relieve awkward tension. Then Nami and Kaya get 4 minutes together, twice as much as Kaya got with Usopp, wherein the narrative is focused on having Kaya's sweet nature impact Nami. They only spend 30 seconds talking about Usopp. The rest of the time is spent on the girls becoming friends despite Nami's cynicism. And this connection pays off later when it is Nami who convinces Kaya of the truth about Kuro, spurring her into action and emotionally supporting her as she reels from the betrayal. It's the connection with Nami which inspires Kaya to fight back against Kuro, and Nami is at her side when she does so. Meanwhile, Usopp is effectively just there. He has a few lines of dialogue, but nothing would be lost if they were cut. And while the girls attempted to fight Kuro, Usopp was still hiding. Yes, he does try contributing to the fight a moment later, but it is brief and ineffective. To be fair, I can understand why the live-action creators would want to give Nami and Kaya more focus. First, it contributes to progressing Nami's character arc through the season, something which we'll discuss further in our video about her. And second, the reality is that the original story is very male-centric, which makes perfect sense given its target audience, but the live-action wanted to expand the appeal. Neither of those are bad reasons. In fact, I really appreciate the latter. Not only does it give Kaya a bit more dimension, but in the absence of Vivi or Robin, or even Nojiko since the live action changed her, it gives Nami a sorely needed female friend. However, I think the live action creators lost sight of good story structure in their haste to give Kaya and Nami more focus. In the anime, Kaya's narrative role is entirely in service to Usopp's arc, and it should be. That's the purpose of a supporting character. And as I already said, Kaya is still a strong character in her own right while fulfilling her narrative role. But in live action, her role becomes more about her connection to Nami and the effect their interactions have on each other. The result being that Usopp winds up as a side character in the arc where he should be the focus.
This is something we've touched on throughout the video already, but it's worth emphasizing. Writers, whenever you make the choice to include, remove, or replace anything in your story, it will have ripple effects. While you don't want to become paralyzed with overthinking, it's really important to consider how your decisions will impact everything else. And don't forget to ask for feedback. No one will see everything on their own.
Of course, the girls aren't the only ones crowding out Usopp. Zoro's backstory and Kobe's B-plot are other factors which, combined with the extra attention given to the girls, leave very little time for Usopp's character to really get a chance to shine. The reason I am focusing on the girls is because the difference in Kaya's narrative role is what most severely impacts Usopp's introduction arc. Even with less time, he could still have left a strong impression if he had been given center stage in the A-plot, which, to be clear, would not have necessitated removing the interactions with Kaya and Nami. Suffice to say, the live-action Syrup Village arc did not give Usopp the introduction he deserves, which we'll talk more about in our video discussing his character overall. Speaking of which, if you're enjoying this video and want to catch those character breakdowns when they come out, be sure to subscribe. You can also drop a like or a comment below and share this video around to help us spread the word. Thanks so much. Now let's move on to... Episodes 5 and 6 of the live action cover 11 episodes of the anime or 27 manga chapters. Like with Orangetown, live action Baratie has the least amount of similarity to the anime plot. The Straw Hats still come to the floating restaurant and meet Sanji, who ends up joining them, but that's about it. I would say some of the most notable changes include the removal of Johnny and Yosaku, a pair of bounty hunters who are friends with Zoro. In the anime, they meet up with the Straw Hats through a very obvious contrivance and are present throughout Baratie and Arlong Park, mainly functioning as guides, both in leading the main cast to new places and expositing information for them. The choice to cut these characters to scale down the cast is sensible, and with the rearranging of other elements, their role in the narrative is not missed. In this arc, rather than having these two lead the Straw Hats to Baratie when they realize they need a cook on board, Garp's attack on the Going Merry pushes them to retreat into a convenient fog, which the Baratie coincidentally happens to be sailing through as well, and Luffy navigates to it using his nose.
If you die to the Enoch, always follow your nose.
But Garp's attack is narratively forced, given that the ship has no identity as a pirate vessel yet, and its occupants are all hidden from view at the time, which means he'd have no way of knowing he should target it. So overall, unfortunately, the segue into Baratie in both versions is poorly handled.
It honestly hurts how much coincidence is in these early arcs in the original story. I think the live-action creators recognized this and made some good efforts overall to fix some of them. It's just a shame that when changes fail to be any better, it's almost more noticeable than the original issues because they're changes.
Marine Lieutenant Fullbody is a minor antagonist for the opening episodes of the original Baratie arc, but similar to Johnny and Yosaku, with the shifting of elements, his narrative role was cut, and so the live action just had him appear as a cameo instead. The reason why Luffy is conscripted as a chore boy in the anime is because when Lieutenant Fullbody attacks the Going Merry, Luffy accidentally rebounds the cannonball into Baratie. Luffy chooses to take ownership of the mistake rather than shifting the blame to the Marines, and thus agrees to temporarily work there as recompense, until he eventually barters to be free of the debt in exchange for protecting Baratie by defeating Don Krieg. Though let's be honest, he would fight Krieg either way since they were both vying for the title of Pirate King. In live action, Luffy is forced to be a chore boy because he tried offering nothing more than an IOU for their meal, which is a nod to the manga wherein he tried to pull the same trick when he was 6. In my opinion, having him try it as a 17-year-old instead reflects poorly on his character, but we'll discuss that more in later videos. Also, rather than incidentally being present when Baratie is attacked, live-action Luffy is the reason Baratie is attacked. Arlong is hunting him and threatens to harm the customers if he doesn't turn up. Luffy, of course, won't let innocent people get hurt in his stead, so he confronts Arlong. Weirdly though, Sanji questions this decision because he thinks,
"This isn't your fight, why would you do that?"
Even though he knows Luffy is Arlong's target. But getting back to other changes, Gin is a vastly interesting character in the anime. We learn he's a high-ranking commander among the Krieg pirates, and he's intensely loyal to Don Krieg himself. But he wrestles under the weight of that loyalty when it clashes with his personal code of honor, and he ends up going through his own mini growth arc. The complexity of his character adds an incredible amount of nuance to the Baratie arc, and so it's unfortunate that his story needed to be excluded from the live action due to time constraints. Although it was good to see that they still used him to showcase Sanji's compassion. Regarding Hawkeye, his narrative role in the anime is not only to further Zoro's arc, but also to impress upon the main characters, and the audience of course, how the Grand Line is home to incredibly powerful and unpredictable individuals. Well before he appears on screen, the narrative is building up tension and intrigue around him, as well as the Grand Line by association.
たった一人の男に50隻の艦隊が壊滅させられたなんて。
その男、お前らになんか深い恨みでもあったんじゃねえか？
そんな覚えはねえ。
昼寝の邪魔でもしたとかな。
ふざけるな！
グランドラインという場所は例えばそういうところだと言っておるんだ。
どういうところだよ一体。
何が起きてもおかしくねえってことだろ。
The live action does have Gin mention the slaughter.
Our captain was hell-bent on finding Gold Roger's treasure, but the Grand Line was his undoing. We lost 50 ships and 5,000 men. I was the only survivor. Save yourself. Forget you ever heard of the One Piece.
But since no connection is made to Mihawk, then this moment is just about hyping the Grand Line as a dangerous place, which had already been established in episode 1.
I'm on my way to the Grand Line.
Pirate graveyard. There are 100-foot waves and sea beasts that'll crush your bones. Once you enter the Grand Line, you never return.
However, live-action Mihawk still fulfills more than one narrative purpose. In addition to maintaining the role he plays in Zoro's arc, he's also used to prompt exposition about the Seven Warlords, a world-building feature which becomes more significant when the Straw Hats are within the Grand Line. Though I do have to mention how ridiculous it is that not only does live-action Mihawk just so happen to come to the Baratie in his search for Luffy, even though all Garp told him was the general region they were in, but he gets there immediately. He was somewhere in the Grand Line, but he gets to Baratie in the space of, what, half a day? If that? I guess he magically warped over. Anyway, moving on. The notorious pirate Don Krieg and his men, who were the original antagonists of this arc, are reduced to just cameos, with Arlong taking over their role as I mentioned earlier. Again, this is a reasonable decision due to time and production limitations, but this change does have a big impact on Sanji, which I'll get back to in a bit. As for the B-plot, Garp is responsible for bringing Mihawk into the A-plot, while Kobe takes a back seat. His biggest contributions being consequence-free eavesdropping and telling Garp something he already knows, which apparently influences Garp to change his approach by continuing to try to do exactly what he's been already trying to do. It's framed as something new, as him deciding no more Mr. Nice Guy, but he still has no intention of killing the Straw Hats, so effectively nothing has changed. Yet the narrative wants us to think something has, so that it's less obvious how much time is being wasted on the B-plot. Once again, there's a bunch of dialogue that is redundant or lacking in subtlety or depth.
Good fighter. Really great fighter. You're not only a good cook, you're a good guy.
Or a good kid.
Yes, we get it, thank you.
Luffy is different. He doesn't follow the rules. He thinks for himself, no matter what anyone else says. Luffy's always been a pirate, and he always will be a pirate. No matter how many assassins you send after him, he'll never change. He'd rather die first.
Told you in the bar I didn't have any friends. But the truth is I couldn't let myself have them, because I always end up hurting the people closest to me.
Being a captain is the toughest job in the world. Making decisions is what separates a captain from the rest of his crew. He acted like a captain. He made the tough call.
Sometimes, when you're in charge, you have to make the tough decisions.
I know! You know, I got it. I got the concept.
Didn't do anything wrong. You acted like a captain.
That last line really bothers me, because it removes all ambiguity, all the nuance that could be had. Zoro has been unconscious. He has no basis from which to make this assertion. So it's just the narrative spelling out what it wants you to think about the conflict surrounding Luffy's choices. But getting back to what I noted earlier about the impact on Sanji caused by Arlong replacing Don Krieg, unfortunately it means that A, Sanji does not have a thematically tailored villain of his own to act as his inciting incident, and B, now Nami's arc is spilling over into what should be Sanji's arc. And between her and Zoro taking so much focus, similar to what happened to Usopp, ultimately Sanji does not get much attention in the episodes that should be dedicated to him. Certainly not enough to earn what should be a meaningful decision to join the Straw Hat crew. In the anime, Sanji was reluctant to leave Baratie partly because he wanted Zeph's validation, but also because he felt indebted to Zeph and thus obligated to stay to assist with and protect Zeph's treasure, the Baratie. So he was sidelining his own dream, and seeing Luffy and Zoro's dedication to their goals outrageous and impossible as Sanji's own was frustrating, because it convicted him of his own passion which he had tried to bury.
剣士として最強を目指すと決めた時から命なんてとうに捨ててる。あの野郎イカれてるぜ。相手は本物の世界一だぞ。結果は見えてた。死ぬくらいなら野望を捨てろよ。簡単だろ。野望を捨てるくらい。
But in live action, Sanji doesn't witness this resolve. His internal struggle is instead shifted to Nami.
You are a fly to him. Something to be swatted and forgotten.
Not if I win.
You're not going to win. Tell your first mate he's going to get himself
Tell
killed.
your navigator to butt out.
It's extreme, Nami.
We all have dreams, but we outgrow them.
Live action Sanji still has his desire for validation and his feeling of obligation to Zeph, and the narrative certainly does well in establishing each of these. But unlike in the anime, there's no resolution for the former, and the latter ends bitterly.
I did not save your life so you could waste it at Baratie.
It's not like I can just leave. Why the hell not? Because you couldn't run this place without me.
Oh, please, little eggplant, your cooking is for
Look, do you want me to quit? Is that what you want?
Quitting is staying here.
Chorboy offered me a spot on his crew. Maybe I take him up on that offer.
You want my permission? You got it. Fine.
Fine!
As a result, his decision to leave with Luffy is not a step made of his own volition, taken once his passion has been rekindled and he feels more secure, but rather one that he is pressured into by rejection. Which, if you know his backstory, makes this parting with Zeph heartbreaking rather than heartwarming. And ultimately, instead of feeling earned, the emotional farewell scene feels shoehorned in because that's what happened originally. Looking at the arc as a whole, in the first episode, Sanji gets less than a quarter of the screen time, only around 7 minutes total. At the end of the first third, we get a few minutes which introduce him, and then at the end of the second third, we get another handful of minutes which squeeze in a bit of meaningful character development. That's it. Within the first half of the second episode, there are 15 minutes dedicated to showing Sanji's backstory with Zeph. But soon after, Arlong shows up and the drama surrounding him and Nami dominates the entire last half of the episode. Sure, another few minutes are given to Sanji's fight for and then with Zeph and saying goodbye, but it's secondary. Ultimately, that last half winds up feeling more like a prelude to Arlong Park rather than a proper conclusion to the Baratie arc. Episodes 7 and 8 of the live action together cover 15 episodes of the anime, roughly 27 manga chapters. As with most of the other arcs, the live action keeps the big picture plot largely the same as the original. It's just executing the details differently, mainly through cutting out characters and a lot of events. Some of those changes are understandable, others are questionable, to say the least. The ones I feel worthwhile to mention include, in live action, the boys arrive together at Nami's home island, whereas in the anime, Zoro and Usopp arrive first, with Luffy and Sanji catching up after settling things at Baratie. I will say, with the changes that were already made to the live action events, plot, and supporting cast, it makes perfect sense for the boys to travel together afterward. But on that note, I may as well mention Buggy's role. He popped in and out of the live action narrative for the first 3 episodes and then disappeared until the previous episode, where it was revealed Arlong used him to find Luffy. This was effectively set up and again helps to create more connectivity through the season. Then he also fills the hole left by Johnny and Yusaku by becoming the Straw Hat's guide to Nami's island. A clever fix which is within character for both Luffy and Buggy. Admittedly, the staggered arrivals of the Straw Hats in the anime contributes to a lot of back and forth between Arlong Park and Cocoa Village. First, Zoro is captured and brought to Arlong, while Usopp winds up in Cocoa Village. Arlong leaves to go to Cocoa, Nami frees Zoro, and he also leaves for Cocoa. Meanwhile, Usopp angers Arlong, so he's captured and brought back to Arlong Park, where Nami also helps him escape. Around that time, Luffy and Sanji arrive and run into Zoro, who is hurrying back to Arlong Park because he'd learned about Usopp's capture. Nami meets up with them, tells them to leave, and goes home to Cocoa Village. Then Usopp reunites with the other guys, and Nojiko comes to tell them Nami's story, during which Luffy takes a walk and he ends up in Cocoa Village, where he witnesses the aftermath of Nami's treasure being confiscated by the Marines. She races off to Arlong Park to confront Arlong, but then rushes back to Cocoa to try to stop the villagers from revolting. But they will not be dissuaded. Finally accepting that she can't win this battle alone, she asks Luffy for help, and the Straw Hats also advance on Arlong Park. In contrast, the live action first shows Nami at Arlong Park and she is sent to Cocoa. Meanwhile, the Straw Hats arrive in Cocoa. They meet Nami there and she tells them to leave before she returns to Arlong Park. The crew instead seek out Nojiko to learn more about Nami's situation. Then Nami returns to Cocoa to retrieve her treasure, but it gets confiscated by the Marines. Afterwards, she asks Luffy for help, so they all go to Arlong Park. It's way more streamlined, which has both pros and cons. Certainly the story is more efficient with its time, but there are several things that are lost or changed in order to facilitate that efficiency. One of the major aspects that was lost was seeing how Luffy, Zoro, and Usopp each responded to Nami's betrayal and then discovering the truth. And first-time viewers sort of get to go through that questioning and discovery along with them, which adds to the experience. In regard to the B-plot characters, in the first episode of this arc, they spend all their time at Baratie as Garp tries unsuccessfully to get a lead on Luffy from Zeph. But Kobe, who in case you don't remember is opposed to them pursuing Luffy, he makes sure to get the info they need from the bartender so they can continue pursuing Luffy. Then the last half of the finale episode, after Arlong has been defeated, is focused on wrapping up the B-plot by having Garp finally catch up to and confront Luffy, and ultimately reveal that this whole plotline was a bait and switch.
I knew I'd never be able to change your mind, but I know who you are, boy. I just needed to make sure you knew it too.
Among the changes made in this arc, the one with the most impact, though it seems like such a small thing, is how the live action has Nami's fellow villagers, and especially her sister Nojiko, genuinely ignorant and hateful toward Nami for working with Arlong.
It's an understatement to say we are not fans.
Ooh, if anyone needs me, I'll be in the Angry Dome.
In the anime, they knew the truth about why she was working with Arlong. Nojiko openly, which meant she could support Nami, and the villagers secretly. So they pretended to reject Nami to allow her the option of escaping from Arlong without feeling obligated toward the people left behind. Both Nami and the villagers are sacrificing so much out of such a deep love for each other. It is so heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. And removing that dynamic by having the villagers actually hate her diminishes the tragedy of their shared burden so much. It just makes them jerks. And her too, because she's just as harsh toward them, which doesn't make any sense. Actually, there's a lot that doesn't make sense. Near the end of the first half of the live action arc, Nami explains to Nojiko that she didn't tell her the truth because she didn't want to lose Nojiko or anyone else. But it's never clarified why telling them the truth would lead to losing them, so I think it's fair to say that doesn't count for anything. And as a side note, I have to mention how the original Nojiko got tattooed as a show of solidarity with Nami. So why is she tattooed in live action? Genzo's design was altered. He no longer has his pinwheel after Nami joins Arlong, even though originally he kept it until Nami was free. So the live action creators were careful to adjust his design to fit their alterations, but not Nojiko's. Why? Probably because they just wanted to ensure she'd be recognizable to fans. I also question how live-action Nojiko and the villagers, after 8 years of hating Nami and viewing her as a betrayer and an enemy, and rightfully so, because we see her actively contributing to their oppression, which was not in the original, by the way, they so easily believe her story and reconcile with her at the drop of a hat. Also, after learning the truth, they suddenly assert that now they're willing to die fighting since they have no hope of buying their freedom. But they never had that hope. They were completely ignorant of Nami's quest. So it begs the question, why have they patiently endured this oppression for all these years? To add to the disappointment, the live-action villagers' determination to fight lasts all of 1 sentence. Then Nami and Luffy assert it's the crew's fight, and the villagers just quietly disappear from the narrative until the after-party. Again, I will acknowledge it's more efficient from a production and runtime perspective, but from an adaptation perspective, it just makes it so shallow by comparison.
If anything, the changes go beyond not making sense into being a direct contradiction of Nami's goals. Her adding to the cruelty does nothing to quell their desire to rebel against Arlong, and she's actively building years of hate and resentment with them. She's already lost all of them. In the original story, she didn't tell the villagers the truth because she didn't want to risk them being unable to afford their tribute by contributing to her efforts. But she wasn't acting as their enemy either. She just accepted their performative disdain stoically.
I'm also left wondering how live-action Arlong knew that Bellemare was an ex-Marine, and how young Nami knew that Arlong needed a cartographer, and how Arlong knew where to direct Nezumi to find Nami's hoard. These all had answers in the anime.
残念ね。私は元軍人なの。
なんだこりゃ。
私が書いた大事なものよ。返して。
これは見事なもんだ。貴重な人材だ。連れてこい。
実はお前の部屋でこんなものを見つけちまったんでね。これは宝の地図じゃねえのか？ここやし村を指しているようだが。
Now, I'll grant that live-action Arlong somehow knowing Bellemare's former career is a minor detail. It's not really necessary to explain how he knows that info because in the grand scheme of things it doesn't matter to the plot. But the latter two? Without the characters having that information, those events, Nami's story would play out very differently. And so the live-action narrative just pulls a somehow and has them know that info. The live-action creators make a lot of alterations, but then they don't follow through on those changes. They either fall back on the original character plot beats even when it doesn't make sense, or they simply leave out vital pieces of the puzzle, meaning that the story doesn't entirely work, not for the new audiences they want to appeal to, nor for the established fans whose knowledge of the lore no longer applies due to changes made. Sadly, I have a lot to say about live-action Arlong and Nami and how this version of the arc kind of falls apart when you scrutinize their actions, but I'll stick to the highlights here and dive deeper in later videos. When it comes to Arlong, his focus and his methods for reaching his goal have changed. In the anime, his focus was on fishmen as the superior species, and his goal was to establish an empire in the East Blue, which is why he extorted money from the people, though he of course had plans to expand to the rest of the world as well, for which he considered Nami a vital asset because of her skill as a cartographer. And Arlong is no fool. He knows that his power over Cocoa Village gives him leverage with Nami, and threatening to hurt them is more powerful than actually hurting them. Giving her the hope that she can protect them is more effective than showing her that she can't. In live action, Arlong's goal is still the same, to establish an empire in the East Blue and then expand. But apparently all he needs for this is a map to the Grand Line, which means he doesn't need money and he doesn't need Nami, because any old map will do. So why go through the hassle of subjugating and taxing the people of the island? Why make a deal with Nami? Heck, why does he even need a map simply to the Grand Line when he's an experienced sailor who originated from the Grand Line?
Doesn't make sense.
Anyway, as further evidence that Arlong does not need either the money or Nami's cooperation, once he has the map, he attacks Cocoa Village, which would effectively forfeit his control over Nami. Not to mention, it would cause him to lose control over the other villages as well, since they can no longer believe they'll be safe if they just stay submissive. Although, speaking of the attack, despite this,
Arlong will kill the entire village!
And this, It turns out everyone from Cocoa Village is perfectly fine. The fishmen just burned down the houses, which certainly is awful, but the contradiction is still dumb. Because now, if anything, Arlong and his crew look incompetent, which is hardly intimidating. While live-action Arlong still believes that fishmen are superior to humans, a lot of the time his focus is on their history of being subjugated by humans. And for some of Arlong's dialogue, it's clear the live-action is borrowing from real-life issues which Western audiences will relate to, shining a light on lingering prejudices and inequality, even though on paper such injustices have been abolished. But unfortunately, it does get a bit repetitive over the course of his appearances.
How can I serve you?
Serve. Interesting choice of words. You never seen a fishman enjoy a meal?
That's because you don't know any fishmen. Except for the ones who repair your ship or clean your house.
You're not smarter than people give you credit for.
Because I'm a fishman.
That's not for...
Does it surprise you that I have intelligence, ambition, usage beyond manual labor for humans? They fear our power, so they bound us with chains. They loathe our presence, so they banned us from their cities. For centuries, humans have used us, kept us down. Humans have ruled the seas for far too long, looking down from their ivory towers, towers built on the backs of fishermen. Your world government fear my people. So, you forced us into slavery. It's your turn to know humiliation and pain.
Of course, there's no inherent problem with this being included, but it does make it a bit more awkward when, after all that, Arlong is defeated by being literally pushed down under the foot of a human.
I have a lot to say about the inclusion of interspecies dynamics and prejudices so early in the series. Arlong's race supremacy was a core part of his character and this arc from the beginning, but trying to expand it into something more complex has some serious knock-on issues. First and foremost is the symbolism that Emmy just explained. But in the original story, the spaced-out story arcs of Arlong Park, Sabbaty Archipelago, and Fishman Island tell a much more important and impactful narrative. When structured as they are, they introduce nuance along the way instead of just having it spelled out all up front. And I will argue that is one of the best portrayals of racial issues and the cycle of violence that I've ever seen in science fiction and fantasy, even more so than the X-Men. It's more excusable if the live-action creators made some of the changes never expecting to get that far in the story, but they're also just hamstringing themselves for no significant reasons.
As for Nami, first of all, as I mentioned, live-action Nami is a complete jerk to the people of Cocoa Village, and it's entirely unnecessary. I get that she has to collect the tribute to satisfy Arlong, but she does not have to callously intimidate them in the process.
Is it enough?
Do we have time to get some more?
No, you don't.
You're short.
Nami, please. Arlong has bled us dry.
Then find more blood.
Actually, when Arlong wants to send her to collect, which would give her the opportunity to secretly intervene if the villagers could not afford their tribute, she tries to avoid going, suggesting that he send someone more hostile instead. And then, when it turns out the villagers' tribute does fall short, she does not secretly make up the difference for them, which apparently leads to them being punished.
Arlong, we need to talk about Cocoa Village.
We can talk tomorrow. Cocoa Village will still be there, provided they pay the tribute in full.
That's what we need to talk about.
Arlong did this. Why?
To punish the villagers.
Way to go, Nami. And that's not even the best part. It seems Nami already had the amount she needed to pay off Arlong before the story even started, because we never see her collecting any money while with the Straw Hats. She returns everything she planned to take from Kaya, and she actually spends money at Baratie.
You'll have to excuse them. They're idiots. Who's ready for another drink? My treat. Let me get your second best bottle of rum.
Anything else?
Yeah. If I wanted to secure passage to the Konomi Islands, who would I talk to?
And that'd be me. Cost you 6,000.
I have Barry.
But after getting home, she tells Arlong she has the required amount. Yes, we do see her win money from Arlong's crew prior to this, but that meager amount could not have been what was needed to turn the tide, or else I would expect her to be far more tight-fisted at Baratie. In the anime, Nami was still 7 million short when she got back from traveling with the others, during which we were shown her gathering several millions. It just boggles my mind that not only does live-action Nami participate in oppressing her fellow villagers beyond what is required, but that she also does not do her utmost to shield them from Arlong, including not closing her deal with him as soon as possible, instead taking her sweet time traveling around with the Straw Hats. Although she has several of the same key moments as the original Nami, the way they interact with others and pursue their goals shows a significant difference in their core character. One that, in my opinion, makes live-action Nami a far less sympathetic character, which affects how invested I am in seeing her succeed and thus diminishes the emotional impact of her story. I've watched this scene several times.
あんたには関係ないから島から出てきって言ったでしょ。ああ、言われた。出てけ！あんたなんか出てけ、出てけ、出てけ、出てけ、出てけ、出てけ、出てけ、出てけ。
It still gets to me. Every time, because of everything that led up to that moment.
For myself, I've seen the entire arc multiple times over the last 2 decades, and every single time I get the manly tears.
But watching this...
I told you to get the hell out of here.
You did.
Then leave. You don't know anything about what's going on here.
I don't.
It's not badly done, but it does not hit the same, because of all the context leading up to it, which we'll delve into more in our video analyzing her character. For now, it's time to wrap all this up. I want to start by giving credit where it's due. The live action did a good job of tightening up the story. I think it took a lot of guts to remove and change as much as they did, but the cuts they made were sensible, and it was impressive to see how they fit everything together despite the missing pieces. The character and plot beats were more succinct, and they streamlined some plot beats by introducing a bit of overlap. They also improved the interconnectivity of the East Blue Saga. Aside from a few hiccups, it flows together quite well in terms of cause and effect. Matt Owens, the showrunner for Season 1, is a big fan of the original story, and that shines through in the many subtle callbacks, foreshadowing, and Easter eggs, but also the amount of care and detail put into the set designs and character costumes. The team clearly did their best to translate a unique art style into live action in a way that audiences could take seriously, and I think it works for the most part. Characters are recognizable without looking goofy. The casting choices as well were clearly done with respect for Oda's vision, and it needs to be said, the actors do a great job. I have some criticisms of the performance, mainly in terms of how it impacts characterization, but I know that it can be greatly influenced by the directing. So from what I can tell, the cast seems like a talented group, and it appears they had a lot of fun during production.
I can't stop crawling my Sorry, do you mind if I start again?
Nice.
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 Let's do it one more time.
But, as I've been saying, there are also downsides to the changes and cuts the live action made. The pacing is wonky. Although tightening up the story definitely improved certain areas, other aspects feel terribly rushed and lose a lot of their emotional impact. I understand that lowering the time investment can make the show more accessible to people who've maybe been curious about One Piece but deterred by the length. So overall, I don't fault the live action too much for its choices, provided they make sense, which unfortunately they don't always. That being said, I think the live action's significantly shorter length means there's just just not enough time overall to really capture the characters and the unfolding story. It seems that the original plan was for the live-action season to be 10 episodes long, but for reasons I couldn't find, at some point during pre-production it was obviously shortened to 8 episodes. And by my rough calculation, the B-plot takes up at least 45 minutes, which is the length of an entire episode. Yet it contributes very little, aside from effectively shortening the A-plot to only a 7-episode season. However, the problem isn't simply less time, it's also poor management of time. When we compare the lengths of the live-action and anime episodes, you can see the anime is almost entirely in chronological order, with the establishing episodes of Syrup Village being the biggest outlier. In general, it progressively allows more time as the scope of each arc broadens to accommodate more main characters and greater foes. The live-action, in contrast, follows no such progression. Of course, it's normal for TV pilot episodes to be longer than the rest, but still, the shortest episode is the finale, the culmination of the whole season, with the most characters to juggle, plots and subplots to tie up, and 2 overarching antagonists. There is of course no denying that the anime can be inefficient with its time as well. It has its fair share of redundancies and narrative loitering, but there can be benefits to taking more time rather than less. Interaction is the lifeblood of any story. It characterizes not just the people, but the places, the world. Interaction makes it all come to life. As an example from Spirited Away, there's a distinct difference between when Chihiro observes the spirits disembarking from the ferry versus when she interacts with the sootballs. The moment beside the ferry is about 30 seconds, whereas the sootball scene is around 2 to 3 minutes. But in those minutes, we get to see a lot of characterization, from the cheeky sootballs, from the gruff but kind Kamaji, and from Chihiro herself, who takes another step from nervous everyman to confident heroine. The setting and world building are developed further as well. To be clear, the moment where Chihiro observes the spirits is not a bad scene. It's equally intriguing and unsettling, and adds to the tension of Chihiro's predicament. My point is simply that the spirit world is more immersive, feels more real, when we see Chihiro interacting with the characters and things there. And the One Piece anime is rich with interaction between the main characters and the world around them. It allows time for narrative exploration of the locale, closer acquaintance with the people there, giving them character and agency of their own, as well as deeper development of the character of focus and the tragedy of their situation. All of this helps create investment, makes the stakes feel bigger, more personal, making the eventual win more satisfying. But the ruthless efficiency of the live action cuts almost all of it out. The main characters mostly just interact with each other and the antagonists, and we're not given any point of view beyond what's happening with them, like we do in the anime. As a result, the places visited in live action, although busily populated, feel cold and lifeless, a backdrop rather than a real place with real people. And this undercuts the stakes, reduces the meaning behind why the crew is fighting, which gives the eventual win less impact. It seems that the live action, similar to other modern adaptations, suffers from the Game of Thrones effect. It's trying to be more realistic or mature by being grim and gritty. And there are so many problems that stem from that approach, but I'll try to be brief. For one, the humor dies. Of course, humor is largely subjective, so I will preface this with my opinion, but what little there was included in the live action mostly fell flat for me. And I think it's because the series was trying to have its cake and eat it too. It mostly eliminated the humor of the original in an attempt to appeal to Western sensibilities, but would occasionally wink at the audience by trying to force the original humor back in, such as by including Luffy's extreme obliviousness, Buggy's randomly gets super upset gag, or the insults the crew throws around. But without the context of comedy, Luffy winds up looking actually dumb. Buggy's outbursts are jarring and awkward, and the crew's ridiculous banter comes off as genuinely demeaning jabs, which makes them far less endearing. Secondly, the themes are damaged. There are many themes within the original work, and we will be discussing them in a later video. But for now, let's just focus on how being a pirate is about freedom, to be yourself, to chase your dreams, to live life to the fullest. And it's clear the live-action writers recognize that because it's explicitly littered throughout the season.
Those who live according to their own rules, who seek a life of freedom and adventure.
Free yourselves!
It's all about being free.
He set me free.
Being a pirate is not about raiding villages or perfect plans.
It's about adventure and freedom.
I'd have to do things their way. I'd lose my freedom.
Everyone should be free to live as they choose.
I'm free.
But everyone is so stiff and reserved. Nami and Zoro are bland stoics, Usopp and Sanji seldom differ. Luffy is really the only one with any inflection and spirit, but it still feels like he's holding back. In the anime, the Straw Hats are so relaxed when they're together. They goof around and banter and laugh a lot. But the live-action crew is so guarded around each other for 95% of the season, which completely undercuts the idea that each of them feel free within this found family, and leaves me wondering why they would even want to stay together. The answer, of course, is because plot. And to be clear, I'm not ignoring the fact that there is an improvement in their mood by the end of the season. But in my opinion, it is too little and too backloaded. I can count on one hand the number of times the whole crew is smiling together. When they get the going merry and then are sailing away in episode 4, when Nami's being teased at Baratie in episode 5, then right after Arlong is defeated, and when they all set sail together at the end of episode 8. 5 times in 3 episodes, all in the back half of a 7-hour season. That's nothing. The third issue with the lack of comedy is that the emotional impact falls flat. Although the live-action creators chose a more grounded tone, at the same time they wanted to replicate the emotional roller coaster of the original. However, I believe that wild emotional ride was due in large part to its comedic tone. The anime manga has ridiculous humor. A lot of slapstick, goofy antics, airheaded moments, subverted expectations, etc. If you enjoy that kind of humor, you will be cracking up with laughter, speaking from experience. But then you'll find yourself seething at the villain, or the narrative will just gut punch you and leave you sobbing your heart out. Again, speaking from our experiences. And then it will make you laugh again. The original embraced the depth of every emotion, which is what made it a roller coaster. But the live action takes itself so seriously that it cannot achieve the same effect. It's toning down the humor and the villainy and the tragedy to be more grown up, which winds up making the emotional journey much flatter overall. As I shared at the beginning of the video, Oda himself said, "A live-action adaptation of a manga doesn't simply reenact the source material on a one-to-one basis. It involves really thinking about what fans love about the characters, the dynamics among them, and being faithful to those elements." So it really frustrates me that despite the showrunner being a big fan, not to mention Oda's personal involvement, the series sometimes misunderstands fundamental elements of the characters, having them say or do things that their anime manga counterparts would never, such as Nami stealing from Kaya and being hostile toward her home, Luffy trying to dissuade Zoro from his challenge and staying silent when Zoro lies about his identity, Usopp bumbling uselessly around with the cannon, and Sanji ignoring Buggy's request for food, etc. Based on what Matt Owen said on the Reverie podcast, the goal was not to change the story, simply to adapt it.
We're not, and this is something else that I told Oda, my job is not to come in here and go, oh, cool, One Piece, this is popular, it's about pirates, got it, I'm going to do my own thing.
Right.
That's not my viewpoint with it. And again, because Netflix knows how valuable this property is because of what it is. It is successful because of what it is in its existence already. So any changes are just about trying to make it palatable to a wider audience and a live action version of it. So no changes come because it's like, oh, I don't like the Luffy and Arlong fight. I'm gonna have Luffy fight something else that are like that. There's nothing like that.
And that explains what I mentioned earlier about how the live action doesn't follow through on their changes. They're only intended to be small adjustments to broaden appeal and reduce time, nothing more. But storytelling doesn't work that way. If you change what and how and why a character does something, it will affect the development of the story, character, and themes. And if you ignore that, things won't add up as they did originally. In the end, you won't have the same story, character, and themes that you were supposed to adapt. The live action, on its own merits, is pretty good. It makes mistakes, some big, some small, but it's coherent enough that it not only succeeded in appealing to a new audience, drawing them into the franchise, but also keeping the established fans happy. I respect that the cast and crew were able to pull off one of, if not the best live-action adaptation so far. I appreciate that they loved what they were doing and did their best within the limitations they had to honor the original material. And after insisting that it be faithful to his work, Oda was happy to sign off on it. But I'm allowed to have a different opinion. And in my opinion, the live action did some things really well, but it didn't truly capture the characters, the adventures, the emotions of the original. If I had to describe the One Piece anime in as few words as possible, my answer would be larger than life. Everything about it is over the top, in the best way possible. The characters, the liveliness, the world building, the adventures, the feels, all of the feels. It's all so much, but never too much. Somehow Oda has crafted an epic that has everything, but it's not a case of a mile long and an inch deep, it's an ocean. Like taking a classic novel and abridging it for children, the live action is faster to consume and easier to digest, but a lot of what made the original a classic is changed or cut. Season 2 is upon us, and I'm sure it will be just as competent as Season 1. But my prediction for the series overall is that the live action seasons will progressively get more disconnected from the source material, which may alienate the manga anime fans and ultimately create two separate, okay, let's be honest about the internet, they will be rival One Piece fandoms. Or maybe not. As I mentioned at the start, after viewing the live action, my hubby began watching the anime with me to see how it compared. And predictably, by the time we finished our side-by-side watch through, he was hooked. Now we're making our way through the Wano arc via the One Piece fan edit, which Zexon kindly told me about.
Emmy and I have spoken a lot about One Piece in general, with many more in-depth discussions happening while we worked on the script. And our thoughts mirror one another overall, which is why I didn't have much to add here. I know, you all miss me, and honestly, I'm touched. I had a clear thought when watching the live-action show regarding its intended audience. I came to the conclusion that it was not meant to be an end-all be-all adaptation of the source materials. I believe the show was meant for exactly two types of people. First are people like me who love One Piece and enjoy the live-action series, despite its clear flaws, as being a celebration of the series. There was a lot of love that went into it, and it's legitimately heartwarming to see, especially when so many sequels and adaptations these days display either a lack of care or outright disdain for their source material. As for the other intended audience, I believe it's for people like Emmy's husband. To wit, people who may be interested in One Piece, but aren't willing to blindly make the leap and time investment. So instead, this is the hook that brings them in and gets them excited. Then they're more likely to see what the real, more in-depth storylines look like. I doubt it was intentional, but the live-action series not being up to the standard of the pre-Sabaody anime or the manga actually works to the benefit of those people that go on to experience the anime or manga. It will be a jump up in quality with notable differences and surprises. And that's all for me for now. But fear not, if you still want some sexy goodness, I'll be back for later videos in this series. See you again next time.
Thank you, Zexon, for all your input. In closing, I just want to say, my hope is that those who fall in love with the live action won't stop there. I hope it will be a gateway to the original, whether via the manga or the anime. But regardless of which version of One Piece becomes the favorite to revisit, I hope we can all appreciate the passion and hard work that went into each version and respect each other all as fans of the same fantastic story. If you're still watching, thank you so much! Please let us know your thoughts in the comments. Was the live action your introduction to One Piece, or were you already a fan of the series? In what ways do you think the live action hit the mark or missed? What are your hopes for the series moving forward? Don't forget to subscribe if you're looking forward to the other videos in this series. And if you're interested in supporting content like this, you can give via Super Thanks or you can check out our Patreon! We often release our videos early there, and we have a bunch of exclusive content. Thank you as always to our current patrons, your support is immensely appreciated. Stay loud and proud, folks, and I'll see you around. One Piece. We are off to a great start. I should also point out that we are aware of how Oda is involved with the production of the live-action series. Au revoir. At which point he's already been strung up by the Marines. I can say it when I'm not trying to say it. Why? Town people alike. Townspeople. tons of people. The actual narration words it as a world like no other. It's like, okay, that means unique. You know, like, I feel like I am listening to an amateur writer describe their worlds to me. It's unique and mysterious and dangerous. It's like, come on! This was written for, like, 14-year-old boys, not written by a 14-year-old boy. Like, come on. Then they team up, and she pretends to betray him to get close to Buggy. No, this is not Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This is Buggy the Pirate. I really hate all of the comments I see around, like, oh, you know, the live action made Nami so much stronger. She's so strong now. Like, she can beat up people like anime Nami couldn't do. I'm like, have you watched the anime? Nami is freaking strong. Luffy and Zoro and Sanji are like massive powerhouses. They're like off the charts strong. So yeah, Nami's not as strong as them. That doesn't mean she's not strong. She's insanely strong. So strong. She's beating people up. She's carrying sacks full of gold that are like the same size as her. Some of it, yes, it's animation, right? So it's ridiculous that she's able to carry that much. Like, she's not built, you know? Like, she's a slender woman. But she's still strong. Just because she's not as strong as these guys who are off the charts doesn't mean she's not strong. Why does she have to be on their level to be strong? Like, again, it's this mentality that a strong female character must have masculine strength to be considered strong. Once again, there's a bunch of dialogue. Partly because he wanted his own validation. I was going to say Sanji's validation. He wanted his own validation. That's not how it works. That they had it. Everyone just on a dime is like, you know what? I'm just going to hate this person now. Not a single, like, and she's a child. She's an 8-year-old child. And these adults are just like, well, that. F her. What's wrong with you? Like, why would you make that change? Why bother including it at that point? If you're just gonna be like, oh yeah, we're gonna fight. Oh no, never mind. Like, why bother including it? Hello, and welcome back to Watching Me Struggle. He doesn't need Nami because any old map will do. Literally, if you look at that map, it's not a good sea map. Okay, granted, I'm no seafaring knowledgeable person, but it's basically just a topography map. Like, no, it's not even a topography. Like, you can't see elevations, nothing. Topography shows you elevations and things like that. This is literally just there's an island over here, there's an island over there, here's the little spot where you go into the ground. Like, there is no information about the sea on that map. It just shows water and land. That's it. It's pathetic. Like, which would effectively, Arlong's major only focus was, I'm better than you, I'm better than you, I'm better than you. You are pathetic and small and deserve to be crushed underfoot because I'm better than you. So when he gets crushed underfoot instead, it's like, yes, take that, you jerk. But when you change that to, you have pushed us down and we are rising up, you know, you have enslaved us and you have, you know, hurt us and we have been oppressed and now we're finally, you know, like showing that we're better. And then you have him crushed underfoot. It's kind of like, oh, are we supposed to be cheering for this? Of course it's Normer. I love the Sipballs. Everybody loves the Sipballs. You can't not love the Sipballs. Who remembers that scene from the ferry? I'm done. Well, it's been fun. I'm going to get you no matter where you go, no matter what you do. I'll find you. Oh, you are so deceased.